Yeah.
Right, okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this seminar today, where we will be discussing the secret of a standout graduate during COVID-19. And with me to chat about this today is Sinead Mooney, Early Careers Talent Acquisitions Lead at ESB, and Lucy Patek, Early Careers Recruitment Lead at Deloitte. Hello to both of you.
Hello, hi everyone.
So, as always, everyone watching, I think you know the drill by now. If you'd like to ask any questions, please do put them in the chat, and time permitting at the end, I will try to get to as many as I can. So, Sinead, if we just kick off with yourself, I think during the national lockdown and even subsequently, we've seen students and graduates use this time to make use of free courses and try and learn new skills. But what skills do you think are needed now for students and graduates to help them stand out amongst their peers that maybe wouldn't have existed or been evident as much during COVID or before COVID, say?
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult because everyone's still trying to find their feet, it appears. But you'll definitely see companies needing employees to be more agile now, and having to, quickly work on things. And, there's change comes very quickly. And we all saw that back in March where things just changed instantly. So people really need to be agile around that. And then I suppose a lot of working under pressure comes with that as well. And as well, you don't have your team to rally around, everyone's working at home. So I suppose people do need to be good at working under pressure. And on top of that, then there's I think emotional intelligence, and having that skill is really important at the moment, because we all are working at home, and it is tough, you have your good days, you have your bad days. So it's really difficult to, you're not talking to your team like you would be turning around your chair usually. So it's hard to monitor what other people's how they're feeling when you're just doing web message over Skype. You're having a phone call here and there with them. So I suppose emotional intelligence is really important now, because you're not engaging with people face to face, and someone might be having a bad day, and you can't take that out on them just because you're not understanding that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, because it's the softer side of things. And in terms of that, in the office, as you said, Sinead, it's very easy if you can see someone struggling a bit on a Monday morning or whatever it may be, for whatever reason, you can kind of give them a bit of breathing space. Whereas now you don't have that luxury, so you might try and call them on Teams or Skype or whatever, but not realizing, and you could want something done, yesterday, not realizing, that they're in a, not the best form or whatever it may be. But Lucy, from your end, what do you see?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with Sinead's comments. Definitely the emotional intelligence piece is so important now, particularly as we're all working, most of us remotely and from home. So being able to kind of interact with your own team, or indeed others outside of your team, and interact kind of in that new kind of appropriate way as well. Those side of the desk conversations aren't happening for us maybe in the most kind of natural, organic way as they would in the office. So just being very kind of aware, I suppose, of others and what others' kind of personal circumstances are. I think definitely resilience kind of would tie into that one as well. So kind of resilience both personally and professionally. So I think the boundaries now, working from home, that line is very much blurred as well. So it does take a great kind of deal of kind of organization, motivation. Everyone's situation is different as well. But very much absolutely would agree with kind of the emotional intelligence, the resilience, your communication skills, that they're all things I suppose we would have looked for pre-COVID, but now with a new lens in them.
Yeah, exactly. And just stick with you, Lucy, if we just continue on this topic for a little bit, how would you advise someone, to get that across, maybe in an interview, whether it's virtual or in person or on a CV, that sense of resilience and emotional intelligence? Because I think it's might be easy to display, in the moment, but maybe an interview might be hard to get across. So what advice would you give for someone to display that skill?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the interview process, I think people will ultimately be asking how candidates have found, the most recent kind of months and what they've spent their time doing during lockdown and pandemic. And I think it's important as well, don't kind of put too much pressure on yourself to kind of come out of this pandemic, this completely different individual, super accomplished. Everyone is very much doing their best, but I do think it's important to, maybe have a couple of points ready in terms of how maybe you've adapted to the change. I think definitely as kind of recruiters and employers now, we're looking for people who are able to, I suppose, react to the change, but also embrace it and really kind of look at how people have adapted to the change and the ability to kind of move with that change. So I think examples of how maybe you've done that could be, in your studies in university, perhaps kind of in a part-time job that you may already have, or anything like that, in terms of kind of how you're working either by yourself individually or within a team as well.
Yeah, great answer there, Lucy. And just Sinead, throw the next question to you, which is about, it's a difficult one to answer, but everything's online now, it was anyway, but it's kind of got more tenfold, and with social distancing being the norm now, is being online the only way for students to kind of promote themselves and engage with employers, or if there's another way to do it, how can they do that?
Yeah, I actually think that it is giving more opportunity now to students to engage with employers, because like employers are going to be holding a lot more events than they used to. It's accessible to everyone, which I think is very important, because I know maybe a lot of companies are headquartered in Dublin, and that's not very accessible for people to be going to those events that you saw take place. So they're accessible to everyone now. But as well, I suppose like there is a lot of, depending on your discipline, if you're technical into IT, like there's loads of meetups that are really important. They're all happening online now, so get involved in those, and that links back to what Lucy was speaking about earlier on. Like you're not expected to have completely changed as a person now, but these events are there. Like use them as much as you can, and you can bring that to interview. So like regardless of what discipline you are, like there are events happening, get involved in them. You'll actually probably find them really enjoyable as well. But yeah, I like to, I suppose, directly answer your question, Piers. Like it is mainly online now, and I think from a safety point, employers like are trying to go that way, to go fully virtually. But just get involved in them. Contact employers online more, because I know I keep avoiding your question here, Piers. But yeah, like it is fully online now. But that's, in my opinion, that's providing more opportunities as opposed to taking it away.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's important to put positive spin on things as best we can as well. And the fact that everything has moved online, the world's become much more smaller place. So maybe opportunities that were, you said, getting to Dublin might be a bit difficult, but even now, if there's a job that you wanted to do, France, Spain, maybe even further afield in the Middle East, that you felt you weren't comfortable traveling, you might be able to do now from home, as it's just the norm and looks like it's going to be this way for a few years. There are positives to it, being online as well. Lucy, would you kind of echo everything Sinead had there? Any more points to make on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it is kind of a reduction in that face-to-face opportunity, but it's very much for us, it's a repositioning. I think even today's Grad Ireland Fair is a great example of that. Like that previously would have been quite a big affair in RDS, and as Sinead was saying, some people may have had restrictions around their travel, so being able to open it up virtually, on a more kind of national basis, I think we've really seen that benefit. So I think it's all about kind of getting quite savvy around the technology options. I think as well, if you're still currently in university, like I know from speaking to a lot of our contacts across universities, like everything is moving online. So get involved with the societies. Like there's loads of events like hackathons, webinars. There's loads of different ways to engage with potential employers, and we're certainly very keen to do that as well. So it works both ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important, again, on a positive note, people who are very personal and enjoy big crowds, I still think they can still get their personality across on the likes of, these Zoom chats or, Zoom calls with employers where it's online. Whereas maybe people who would have found the event and the ODS maybe a bit intimidating, or other 100%. Events to speak face to face, I think it makes it a little bit easier for them to do it virtually. They're sitting in, their own room or the living room, maybe in a comfortable environment. So, there's positives to take from that as well.
Absolutely.
I do want to chat a bit about, LinkedIn, and Lucy, just sticking with you in this one. Just twofold, really. Is there other kind of platforms, similar to LinkedIn, or other platforms students can be using to promote themselves from a career perspective and for look for jobs? And also, would you have any tips for students using LinkedIn as a platform? Because I feel like it might be a bit intimidating for some people, as they might see it as it's something to use when you have your career up and running, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. We're definitely seeing a lot more in terms of that exposure and experience of using LinkedIn. I think ultimately it will depend on the company and what their kind of recruitment methods are for engaging with students as well. So, usually when you're dealing with very high volume, it may not be possible to use LinkedIn for that kind of specific job search. But I think it's definitely important as a student, as a graduate, to get the basics right, have your LinkedIn profile fully up to date, like ensure that all your skills, and I would often say this to candidates, like like even skills that you've acquired throughout college, like they're all transferable. So really kind of go back and do, I suppose, even I would say like an audit of your CV, an audit of your skills, and really ensure that you're highlighting skills you've acquired. Again, it could be through university, it could be through maybe sports or fitness teams that you're involved in, ensuring that that's fully up to date. I think it's fantastic even today on this platform, the students can actually update their details, their profile in advance. So it's just ensuring that you're taking that bit of time to prepare in advance for these kinds of events where there is the opportunity to update your profile. But there's a lot of other quite, niche online platforms as well for people to get involved in. And depending on your area, there's the option to have your own portfolio or CV portfolio of your work available online as well. So it's about kind of promoting yourself as best as you can and availing of the different platforms.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. I think it's important as well, like people control through LinkedIn and maybe see loads of profiles got loads of detail and try and copy that. But the point of it is get your personality across, try and be a little bit different rather than copying templates and things like that. Sinead, from your point of view, I think Lucy's made a lot of good points there, but would you like to anything add on the, LinkedIn advice for students or the platforms that maybe they can use to promote themselves?
Yeah, like I definitely echo a lot of what Lucy said there. And especially with the high volume, recruitment, you might not get to use LinkedIn as much as you'd hope, but definitely have the basics right and get your LinkedIn profile as good as possible, because use it as building your network, more importantly, and the more people you follow, like my follow list is quite long now, and it's quite fascinating actually to just scroll through your feed, and it's quite inspirational as well, which I think people need at the moment. So definitely utilize LinkedIn, but as well those separate sites then depending on your discipline, like open source communities, where you can build real life examples and you can showcase that at an interview.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think just for students with LinkedIn, I think it's an important discussion to have, because I think a lot of people could be wrong in this, but maybe putting the bit on the back burner because it can be an intimidating enough platform because it asks for a lot of information. Whereas, used to using Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it may be, where it's very simple to do, you can upload something within 2 seconds. Where I think LinkedIn just requires a little bit more time and effort to put into it. But as you both said, it is really worth putting time and effort into it and making it the best you can make it. Given unfortunately the current circumstances with COVID, and we're all sick of the C word at this point, but it has affected, I think, jobs, and I think unfortunately there are less out there maybe than there would have been if we were just in normal times. I think we were on an upward trajectory as an economy in general. So if maybe a graduate leaves college and they see the opportunity that they wanted isn't there anymore, or there's some there but there's not as many as they would have liked, and then they have a career gap on their CV, will that be seen as a negative, do you think? Today, just for you now.
Absolutely not. I personally always advise students go travel or something after college, because once you're in the working world, you're there. So you use this time to adapt and kind of gain a growth mindset as well, because I suppose people do need to put a lot of their energy into learning and finding new opportunities. You might not exactly get the plan that you've always had in your mind, but I know I was listening to a podcast yesterday that one of our past graduate engineers had recorded, and he came out of college. He didn't get what he wanted as a leaving cert. Then he came out of college and it was in the middle of the recession. So he couldn't get a role in his job or, in his profession. And he just had to completely change things up. And he built a completely different skill set for those few years, and then ended up going back to do a master's and joined our engineering graduate program at that point. And he ended up going to Bahrain then on the program, which he said was the highlight of his career. And had he not followed that path, he wouldn't have got to go to Bahrain. So I suppose employers aren't going to see it as bad if there's a gap on your CV. We all understand, we're all trying to figure things out at the moment. So it's definitely not a bad thing, but do use the time, fill that gap with something that's going to benefit you in the long term.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important to say, so Lucy, just before I get your thoughts on this topic as well, is that I think some people might think the path is, you graduate, you go into your graduate career and that's it, it's straight away. But, there are different paths, and that story you told us there, Shane, is great as well. Even just by traveling, you can get opportunities that way. It might be a way to improve yourself as a person and see new cultures, but it can be a way for job opportunities to pop up that you never even thought existed. But yeah, Lucy, just to get your thoughts on the whole aspect of, the career gap and how it looks on the CV from an employer's point of view.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd really agree with a lot of what Sinead was saying. Certainly we would never kind of look negatively on that kind of career break or taking time after your degree. Certainly, as Sinead was saying, previously in the past, travel was always that big motivator for grads, and that, maybe is a little bit more difficult now. But I think it's all about kind of seeking the new opportunities and being able then to kind of be prepared to talk about what you've done during that time and highlight the skills that you've acquired. It could be something maybe you're taking time due to personal circumstances. If travel is an option, people may wish to do that. And I would always, I would see that as being quite positive. But there's lots of other things, like people are taking time out now for a whole host of reasons. And I think things like even volunteering, if it's something maybe you want to focus on. We've certainly been speaking to a number of grads who have gotten involved in kind of small startups and more kind of entrepreneurial aspects throughout their college. So absolutely, like now is the time to work on that. And if that's something you're very passionate about, do take the time. The career and the working world will always kind of be waiting for you, but just be prepared then when you do come to interview to be able to kind of talk to that and highlight what skills you've acquired and really kind of sell yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it boils down to what did you do during the time as well. Do you mean if you did do nothing with the time, then obviously that might be seen as a negative on your CV. But if you can, show that you did travel or you volunteered, as you said, Lucy, or maybe you didn't feel like you had enough practical experience, that your degree didn't give you enough, so you went out and got it yourself. Things like that obviously would be seen as a real positive, and obviously depends on the length of the break as well. I think that gets taken into account as well. Lucy, stick with you just on. This is I appreciate this is a bit of a broad question, but graduate trends that you might have seen develop over the last 6 months or so, maybe both from an employer's perspective, both from the student perspective as well.
Yeah, I think certainly kind of when I was thinking about this question, I think some of the trends we're seeing, particularly from kind of that employment perspective, is, as I mentioned earlier, like the blurred lines between the personal and the professional. So ensuring there's quite like a structured kind of strategy from the employer side. There's a huge focus at the moment in Deloitte around kind of well-being and mental health programs. Again, tying back to what I was saying earlier around developing that emotional intelligence, that resilience piece in our employees. And that's, I would think probably especially important for graduates starting out in their career, having that kind of support structure in place. So certainly I think from an employer perspective, that's something certainly very important. I think probably then from graduate side, it's certainly all still about that candidate experience, that graduate experience point of view. I think definitely at the moment, from my kind of conversations, I suppose in the last few months, we are seeing an extended time in education. Perhaps people may have finished their undergraduate degree and then maybe we're either going to take time out or indeed start straight away. But certainly seeing in the market there's increased interest, I think, in extended education. So perhaps pursuing postgraduate studies in an area of interest, or again, as we were saying there, kind of taking that time out to figure out what's the best kind of move for you upon completing your studies.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult question to ask as well, because I think sometimes trends take, years to develop sometimes. So, but like it is interesting to see, in the short term, what has changed really, really quickly. So like you said, Lisa made the point there about, increased education, but then maybe in 2 years' time, depending on how everything goes, we might see that people didn't like going into education because it wasn't the in-person lectures anymore. So that could be taken away. You just never know. So Sinead, is there anything different you've seen on your end, like I said, even from the graduate or employer's point of view, in terms of trends that developed during COVID?
Yeah, like it's very similar to what Lucy said, but and what you said there, Pierce, like trends haven't actually really been set yet. And I think what's really important for graduates to know or students to know is that, yeah, they might feel a bit lost in this whole process, but we do as well, because, this is the first time that we're trying to navigate it and no one actually knows what they're doing and everyone's trying to do the best. So every time, if a graduate's at an interview and they're really nervous because they don't really know what they're doing because it's virtual, then just remember that the people on the other side of the computer are probably feeling the exact same as well, because they're trying to get through it as well for the first time. But like trends, like people definitely seem to be furthering their education, continuing on to maybe do masters. But then I know there was probably a reduction in roles this year for graduates, but I think employers are invested in taking graduates. It's definitely a long-term goal as opposed to a short-term goal. So I don't really think we'll see that huge of a drop in graduate roles over the next year.
Yeah, that's really positive to hear. And I think one thing about graduate roles, which is different to maybe more senior positions or even, part-time work during college, is that when you've graduated, employers are looking for people to develop new ways. How can we adapt to this new world with everything happening? And it's more likely to be graduates who can maybe come up with these unique ideas and ways of moving forward with the world. So it's positive that employers will continue to look for these kind of people, the younger generation of people. We talked about it at the start, and just to say we have loads of questions coming in, so I'll try and get as many as I can near the end, but do keep them coming. But we talked at the start about people doing online things and extracurricular activities to make themselves stand out, and we mentioned emotional intelligence and resilience. But if there was one skill, maybe stick with Sinead on this one, that you'd recommend people do develop during this time to help them stand out a little bit, maybe something a bit different to a quirky, what would that be?
I'm going to be awkward with my answer here, Piers. I'm not going to name a particular skill, because really it doesn't matter what it is. If you're one of that crew that get up at 6 a.m, go for a swim, and that's the thing you picked up during lockdown, then great, because that's going to add to your well-being hugely. And if if your well-being is improved, then that's going to have a positive effect on your day and your career. But then on the other end, if you, I don't know, maybe you work in, or you're a marketing graduate, but you've taken up a course in data analytics during lockdown, then brilliant. Then you're improving your technical skills and you're gaining something there. So it actually, Pierce, doesn't matter what it is, as long as you've chosen something, you've stuck with it, and you know what you want to get out of it, and you actually get benefits out of it.
Yeah, 100%. It's a great answer, Sinead. And it's important to say as well, something we did touch on earlier was that, don't feel the pressure to come out a completely new person. I've learned 15 new skills. And something you said there, Sinead, mental well-being, people might have struggled with loneliness, or, being by themselves at home, if it was work or maybe with college, missing friends and stuff. So they might not have had the opportunity or be in a position to learn, take up all these new courses and do new skills. But if you can show that, my mental well-being was maybe suffering, but I did this to improve myself, I took up exercise, reading, whatever it may be, meditation, to show that you did something, you showed resilience and you adapted to change, that can be seen as skill and something that can be demonstrated as well. So Lucy, I'll throw the question over to you as well to see if you can help me out with this.
Yeah, I suppose definitely like self-care was something that I kind of had on my list, and I think it's very similar to what Sinead was saying there. I think it's very hard to kind of pick one skill. It's all about the individual, but I wouldn't underestimate the importance of self-care during this time, and really take the time to work on yourself. Like as Sinead was saying, like if there's something that you want to focus on, and try your hand at something new, like now is the time to do that and be able to kind of showcase those new skills. I think it's, it's difficult for everyone to, it's easy, I think, to kind of say adapt to change and everything, but that can be difficult in itself. So I definitely would agree with a lot of the points, and there's lots of opportunities to acquire those new skills, albeit now in that new virtual context.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Can't really add anything to that. I know we were, I think, a couple of minutes late starting, so I'll try and run this over to get through more questions if I can do it. So that's all the questions from my end. Anyway, we'll throw it to the floor now. So thanks very much, guys. We did have a question here just about, do you know anywhere about that you can go for courses and specific skills? But I do know we did an interview with a NUIG student called Shane Hastings, and blog with him, and he set up a free site where it was all the free courses and things that were made available during COVID. So I think if you check out the GradireLand Workplace blog, you'll find, a link to that, and I think that's the best way to do it, because there's so many of them. There's literally hundreds of thousands. There's a few good ones here about, communicating with people on LinkedIn, and if you're applying for a job, is it a good idea to maybe connect with someone in that company before applying? Or would you just maybe, because people are saying they're getting a bit disheartened when they send a CV and they hear nothing back, would you recommend connecting with someone from a company, the company you're applying for a job with? Sinead, throw that one to you.
Yeah, I'd recommend connecting with people before you actually apply and having a chat with someone. It doesn't matter what part of the company they come from, and have a chat with them and find out a bit more about the role itself and about the company. Because if you have that knowledge, then your application is going to come across as a lot better, because depending, I know every application is different, but some of the questions in our application, if you have that information in it, it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Lucy, if I just throw this one to you as well. So this is again touching on resilience, how would you bounce back from, either not getting a grad role or maybe even no response, kind of, what tips would you give for someone who maybe doesn't get their dream graduate role straight out of college that they've applied for?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's definitely something we've probably all had to experience at some time or other. I think definitely, like, kind of thinking about it quite logically, if you actually do receive that rejection email or rejection letter in the post or whatever it is, I think, you know, definitely take the opportunity to ask for feedback. Most companies will ensure that they're giving you feedback, whether it's maybe you weren't successful in being shortlisted for the interview, or perhaps you were shortlisted for the interview. It's really a great opportunity to ensure that you're getting that feedback and kind of take the feedback, you know, as it stands as well. I think sometimes we're maybe sometimes not so great at kind of hearing feedback, especially if it can be critical, but really treat it as kind of a learning lesson, I suppose. I've spoken to a lot of graduates over the years I've met at fairs, and perhaps they have applied and haven't been successful, but then they reapply again the following year. So I actually have seen people that have joined the firm, and for whatever reason, the first time around they you know, weren't successful. But I think it's important to kind of take that feedback and take that away. And if it's something you're really kind of passionate about, if it is that company and that dream job, have a look at the areas. Perhaps if you get that feedback, have a look at some of the gaps maybe on your CV or your skill set, and take that time to work on that, and try to kind of see the positive in it, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's great. And just to follow up on that one, to stick with you as well, if you don't get feedback automatically in the rejection letter or email, whatever it may be, what's the best way to go about asking for feedback? Is it just to reply to that email directly?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, feedback is always, in each kind of company will have its own kind of policy as well. I know from ourselves in Deloitte, like, we deal with such a high volume of applications that sometimes it can be really hard when you've got over 5,000, 6,000 applications to give individual feedback on everyone. But certainly I would contact, you know, the team or the recruiter perhaps that you were dealing with to request that feedback. And even if it's just some general kind of pointers, again, with that kind of high volume piece, I'm speaking from experience, sometimes it can be hard to give that individual feedback. It can sometimes be maybe a little bit more general, but really to kind of ensure that you're getting that request for feedback in, so and position it as a way of kind of learning as well.
Yeah, and you never know as well, you know, when you ask for feedback, that might stick in a recruiter's mind as well, that someone expressed an interest in how to improve, you know, so it could be a positive in that aspect as well. There's so many questions, I'm struggling to scroll through them all at this point. There's actually a really, really good one here, Sinead, which is, how do you demonstrate to someone that maybe you find it difficult to work from home remotely because you live in a big house and you don't really have the capacity, or maybe if you live, you know, in the country, the internet connection is not as good, but you're applying for a graduate role that requires you to, you know, work from home? What's the best way to communicate that to an employer?
Just be upfront, really. Yeah, like, just be honest. Everyone's understandable now, and like, a lot of people are going through the same situation, so it's not going to be seen as a bad thing. Employers are definitely doing as much as they can to, you know, maybe get equipment to new employees, or, you know, whatever they need, and employers are working with their new employees to figure out whatever needs. So it's up to the employer really to make sure that they're able to work and they have everything that they need. So just be upfront and honest.
Yeah, I think just being upfront and honest without anything like that. Like I said, it's not a circumstance that's in your control, and I think everyone's very understanding of, you know, internet not working or someone walking in on the call. Thankfully, it hasn't happened to us today, which is, I think, which is good. But that's all we have time for, unfortunately. I apologize if I didn't get your question. I did try to get through to as many as I can. But Lucy and Sinead, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it, and hope everyone watching found that really enjoyable and informative. And please remember, students, to refresh your screen just to keep up with the next seminar. But thank you very much, guys.
Thanks so much for your time.